Can we give God a praise one more time? All over the house, one more time, can we give God a praise? Let's give the one that gave us life, health, and strength, help us all week long. Let's give him a praise. Come on, you can do better than that. We usher in the presence of God to help this preacher. Come on, open up your mouth and give God some praise. And while you do that, while you give God some praise, why don't you just stretch your hand towards the minister and say, God, anoint him like never before. Anoint him with your spirit and your power. In the name of Jesus. Now clap your hands like the devil's in between you and give God some praise. Come on and give God some praise. Hallelujah. You may have your seats. I have the distinct privilege of introducing my older brother. Many of you may not know that he was my older brother because of the height and size difference. But there was a time when he was bigger than me. And he used to beat on me. But when I got bigger, things changed. And I said, when I get bigger, you ain't gonna be able to mess with me. And I've been bigger than him for about 15 years now. But I have seen God's hands on his life, and I know my brother when he was not saved. And he knew me when I was not saved. And people knew the both of us. And they knew that if you fight Tyrell, you're going to fight Jakari too. Because it ain't going to be no fair match. And so, here we are today, years later, and God has saved my brother. Not only did he save him, but he filled him with the Holy Ghost. And he has been serious, and he's been on fire for God. My brother said years ago, when I gave my life to God 10 years ago, and my brother said, my grandpa, Bishop C.L. Bryant, he said, he called us and he said, you know, both of y'all got a calling on your life. And my brother, he didn't want to be fake. He didn't want to accept it at that time because he did not want to be playing games. And 10 years later, God has saved him. And my grandpa would be so proud to see this day. And I believe and I know that God has allowed him to peek into this service from the heavens and to see his prayer answered, praying for his grandson to be saved. And he's saved, preaching his first sermon today. And I'm so happy to introduce to you and to present to others my brother. And I ask you to just pray for him that God would anoint him. He is a leader. He is a serious man of God. And God is going to use him to take the world by storm. This will not just be a local preacher. This is going to be a worldwide preacher that's going to transform lives and souls in the streets and outside of the streets. Will you all stand all over the house and help introduce by clapping your hands? Will you receive Minister Tyrell Edmonds? Come on and give God some praise.
Give honor to God first and foremost. Give honor to Pastor Washington, First Lady Washington, Elder Edmonds, Apostle Brown and his wife, to all the missionaries and evangelists, to Elder Watkins, and my cousin, Elder Barnett, Mother Washington, give honor to her also, to all the saints of God. My mom's going to do a sopranic solo.
Amen. I say, I guess if he can preach, I certainly can sing. I hope I'll be able to get through this, y'all. I don't know. This is going to be hard. Only because I'm happy. I'm just rejoicing. God is so good.
Ghost.
Yes.
Genesis chapter 32, verse 22 through 28. You haven't said amen. Somebody read that for me.
And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh.
Yes.
And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint,
Yes.
as he wrestled with him.
Yes.
And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me.
Yes.
And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thou shalt be called no more Jacob,
Yes.
but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men,
Yes.
and hast prevailed. And Jacob, that's it.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for the word. You may be seated.
Yes.
My text today is from denial to deliverance.
Yeah.
Denial. The action of declaring something to be untrue. The refusal of something requested or desired. Deliverance. The action of being rescued or set free. In our scripture today, this is one of the Bible's mystery narratives. The man is identified by Hosea as an angel. The importance of the narrative is Jacob's willingness to contend with God as his time of desperate need. He knows God has willed to bless him, and he will settle for nothing less than his full inheritance.
Yes.
His contending tenacity causes him to again prevail. The man obviously knew Jacob's name. He was made to say it because of its meaning. It must acknowledge his weakness before he is transformed. Israel can mean prince with God. He strives with God, or may God preserve in spite of his character weakness. God commends him for his prevailing attitude. He is a fighter.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Jacob lived a life of denial and deception from the time Jacob was born. He had an internal struggle with his own personal identity.
Yes.
In Israel, every name has a meaning, and that meaning became your destiny. Jacob, whose name means cheater, deceiver, lived up to every ounce of his name. He conned his brother Esau to steal his inheritance. He also deceived his dad to get his father's blessings, which belonged to Esau, because he was firstborn. He also deceived his father-in-law to get the majority of his wealth. And in his own mind, he rationalized that he deserved this and everything was okay, living in denial of who he really was. But it all caught up with him, and Jacob had to run for his life from his family, but most of all, Jacob ran from himself. It was at the river of Jabbok that Jacob's past, present, and future collided. his brother Esau was bearing down on him with 400 soldiers. Jacob was at the crossroad. He had to make some tough decisions in his life.
Come on.
With his back against the wall and nowhere to run or hide, Jacob had to deal with his denial of who he really was and what he had done. It wasn't until God got Jacob all alone that he was able to deal with him, and Jacob was confronted with reality of his own life. But it was at the river of Jabbok where Jacob could no longer run from himself, and he was forced to wrestle with his own stuff. Passing over the Jabbok at night was being cautious in that none of Jacob's family or flocks would be caught crossing the Jabbok. Later, when the possibility of Esau attacking them would be present, it is bad enough being attacked anytime.
Yes, it is.
But being attacked when fording, crossing a stream, puts those fording the stream at a terrible disadvantage. Crossing the Jabbok at night had its perils, but according to some, the Jabbok is perhaps 30 feet wide and at most about hip deep. So a crossing at night where the stream could easily be forded made it much less perilous than crossing the stream during the day with Esau's army attacking them. That was the path of obedience which God had ordered. Running the other way would have been going the opposite way God had told Jacob to go, which means Jacob would have been disobeyed. The river of Jabbok was symbolic because on the other side of the river lay the promised land that God promised Jacob's grandfather and Abraham. But Jacob first had to deal with his past and with his present before he could ever move on and receive God's blessings for his future. All of us need to deal with our own denial. We need to wrestle with old habits or any destructive behavior that separates us from God. God will not take us into a new place of promise until we deal with our baggage. Until we wrestle with that, we will continue to live in denial. You can't fix what you don't face. Most of us never choose to have a Jabbok experience. You will remain the same until the pain of remaining the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. God uses many things in our lives to move us from denial to deliverance. Some are personal crises, which causes us to re-elevate our life. Your life isn't over, but you begin to feel the pain of your sin a little and to see the errors of your ways. Yet, the truth is that a personal crisis usually does not get us to change our ways completely. Often, the crisis just leads us down the road to what people call minimization, where we say, I can handle this, it's not really a problem, I don't need any help, I don't need counseling, I can quit anytime, I can work it out on my own. But we can't handle it and we can't quit. We have a problem. Another thing God uses to break down our denial is confrontation from family or friends. Galatians 6:1 says, brother, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently.
That's the word.
For Jacob, it was a little more direct. He overheard Levian's son complain about what Jacob had done, and he was confronted by what he had done. There comes a time when it takes confrontation to help a person. Another thing that God uses to move from denial to deliverance is a looming catastrophe. Catastrophe event causing great and often sudden damage or suffering a disaster. For Jacob, this was his brother and 400 soldiers closing in on him. When a personal crisis and confrontation don't work, God usually lets sin run its course. A catastrophe is when the bottom falls out your life and you have nowhere to turn except to God for help. Other people call this hitting rock bottom. You're at the end of your rope. The pain of your ways is too far great, and you are about to lose it all, or you have lost it all. It's then that you must finally relent and admit you have a problem. Sometimes the only thing that gets us to admit we need help is to run out of rope. Matthew 5:3 in the Message translation says, "You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God." It's in that moment that God wrestled with Jacob and who he really was and what he had done. It is a painful experience. You call this a face-to-face meeting with God. The wall. Others have called it the dark night of the soul. This is a time when we are confronted with who we are and what we have done, and forced to wrestle with whether we are willing to surrender to God and let Him direct our lives. Many people who profess to be Christians are denying Christ daily. The main reason for denial is that people would rather cherish their life here on earth more than our future life in heaven.
Oh, yes.
Jesus died for us in public, so don't only live for Him in private. Most of the time, we Christians believe we have given our will over to God, but in reality, we haven't, and thus are living in denial. The wall is a time when we are confronted by the disparity between who we are and who God calls us to be. Between what we do and who God is calling us to live. We realize we have been living as we want and in our own strengths and will. And so when we encounter God, we see ourselves as we really are and the denial which has filled our lives. This can be a frightening and yet pivotal moment as we feel drawn to surrender yet still wanting to have control. It is not easy, and in fact may even be the most pain-filled experience of our lives as we die to ourselves only to be reborn to God. It is at the moment that we have to choose to let God and to surrender our lives to His will or continue living in denial as we are. When we choose God, we are healed spiritually, but at the same time, we begin to be healed psychologically, and this is where the soul is healed. The word soul is the Greek word for puchi or psyche. Man and woman is a soul, has a spirit both which resides in the physical body. The soul addresses the body, the spirit addresses God, the physical body addresses the world. Jacob was desperate and he was determined to experience the true conversion in his life. It's only when we get desperate when you get to the end of your rope. That when then become determined to not let go of God until God reserves things in our lives. No matter how long or painful it might be, it's at the wall or the dark night of the soul that many seek to cling to God as never before. And that's what Jacob did. Jacob had a bad habit of holding on to things that didn't belong to him. The same tenacity he used to hold on to his brother's heel in the womb is what he used to hold on to the presence of God. Sometimes our lives are weakness and become a source of strength. And Jacob held on to God because he knew his life depended on it. Conversion is also always a struggle, and it is painful both physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
But it was in the struggle with God himself that Jacob realized his brokenness or his dependence on God. God knocked his hip out of socket and gave Jacob a limp to remind him of that. But know that whenever we are seeking conversion, not only is it painful, it is a process. God wrestled with Jacob overnight, but every decision, every problem, and every opportunity which presented itself to Jacob after that, good or bad, he continued to wrestle with his old ways, or the new path upon which God called him. Life transformation didn't just happen. It was a lifelong process, which was a challenge time. And again in Jacob's life, but as the months and years go by and he chose God time and again, it got easier. But it was a process, sometimes slow and arduous. So often we bring a fast food mentality to everything in our lives, even our spiritual life and change. We think it's going to happen almost instantaneously, but it's a process. When was the last time you cried out to God in sheer desperation and determination and said, God, I can't, but you can? When was the last time you grabbed onto God for dear life and didn't let go until God pulled you through? God has something he wants you to deal with in your life. It's when we start facing our own denial that deliverance begins. God not only wanted Jacob to deal with his denial, the disconnect between the faith he professed and the life he was living. He wanted to deliver him to the life he had in store for him. But first, Jacob had to either deal with who he was and what he had done. Then and only then conversion began to take place. In verse 27, when God asked, "What is your name?" Jacob had only one answer. His name, which means cheater, manipulator, liar, deceiver, broken. God said, "Okay, now you finally get it." And then God said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with man and overcome." It was in that moment that God not only gave him a new name, but he gave him a new life and a new future. He went from Jacob, one who deceives, to Israel, one who struggles with God and overcomes. As we shall see, Jacob's change was instant but yet gradual. There are at least 3 specific blessings which Jacob received from God as a result of his persistent clinging to God for the blessings. These blessings involve Jacob being given a different name and a dynamic power and a divine revelation. First, a different name. And he said unto him, "What is thy name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel." Chapter 32, verse 27 through 28. There are 2 important things we should know about this name. They concern the meaning of the name and the merit in the name. To learn the meaning of the name, we need to know that the name is composed of 2 words. This first word is Israel and can mean ruler or warrior. The last word is El, the abbreviation for God. So the meaning includes the idea that God rules or that God fights. And also that one is a ruler or a prince for God, a fighter for God. The merit in the name is in fact that it is very complimentary for Jacob. In whatever way one looks at the meaning of the name, it honors Jacob. What an improvement the name Israel is on the name Jacob. The name Jacob, which means supplanter, represents guileful character, but the name Israel represents gallant character. For Jacob, the name Israel can mean that God rules or God fights for Jacob, that Jacob rules and fights for God. Either way is an honor of Jacob, that Jacob had to confess that his name was Jacob before he was told his new name. Simply underscores that the fact that the change in the name reflected a change in character. Second, the dynamic power, for as a prince has thou power with God and with men, has prevailed. Verse 28 in our scripture, this is a great blessing indeed. One great lack in the church today is power. We have programs and build funds and people and popularity, but we do not have spiritual power. Jacob obtained power through his earnest prayers and cleansing to God for his blessings. The church needs to pray too instead of all the other fleshly things. It tries to revive its declining ministry. Third, the divine revelation. I have seen God face to face. Verse 30 in our scripture, what a marvelous revelation Jacob received from God. The revelation of seeing God's face climaxes the entire revelation. He received from God, which includes Jacob's new name and divinely given power. God revealed marvelous things to Jacob that night. Divine revelation is such a choice blessing. Today, we that have choice blessings in the form of the written word value their blessings, however, they seldom read the word or study the word. They may argue vehemently about the translations of the Bible, but they have little appetite for the truth of the Bible. Psalms 34 and 19, many are afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him from them all. Psalms 34, I sought the Lord and he heard me and delivered me from all my fears. Luke 4:18 through 19, today the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and recovering of the sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the favorable year of the Lord. Deliverance seems to be a forgotten word in our church today. Deliverance is an awesome word. The very sound of it stirs the heart and mind. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word natsah means to rescue or to deliver. It is used of the physical rescue or spiritual deliverance. No matter what the battle or situation is, God will deliver. When you are delivered, you're released from bondage and imprisonment. Whatever you need, God knows how to deliver his people. I stand here today as a living witness that God can deliver from any addictions, alcohol, cigarettes, and more. Deliverance will strengthen you and prepare you for a great manifestation of God's power. Deliverance is bread for the children of God. It is a part of the spiritual diet from which every believer has the right to partake. When deliverance is not part of a believer's diet, the result is spiritual malnutrition. I am convinced there are multitudes who are spiritually malnourished because they are not receiving the children's bread. Bread is simply defined as food or sustenance. Sustenance is defined as means of support, maintenance or subsistence, that the state of being. Sustain something that gives support, endurance, or strengthens Christians' needs. Bread to endure. Without such, there will be fainting and weakness. The reason why so many believers are weak and fainting is because they have not received deliverance, which is the children's bread. We cannot bring successful deliverance to the world until we bring it to the church and we ourselves are delivered. Since I've used bread as a picture of deliverance, I want to reiterate that deliverance is a vital part of a believer's spiritual diet. Without deliverance, you'll be lacking in your diet, becoming spiritually malnourished. However, I must emphasize that deliverance, although a vital part, it is only part of being fed. We cannot live by bread deliverance alone, but by every word that proceeds out the mouth of God. Studying and receiving the word of God is a vital art and a proper spiritual diet. This includes anointed preaching and teaching. We need deliverance, but we also need the word. We will not be strong without revelation, knowledge, prophesying, and doctrine. 1 Corinthians 14 through 6. This is addition to deliverance must be components of the diet of God's people. No matter how many demons are cast out of a person's life, they will return unless the person lives accordance with the word of God. We need to develop good spiritual habits when it comes to the word and deliverance. Knowledge is the key to deliverance. The more you know about God, the enemy, and his operation, the more you will be able to defeat him and cast him out. Deliverance is designed to eliminate the spiritual obstacles that impede progress. Deliverance makes the rough places smooth and the crooked places straight. You must renounce and put to an end to the following things if you want to see real and lasting deliverance and breakthrough in your life: curses, sin, pride, passivity, ungodly soul ties, autism, fear, embarrassment, unbelief, lack of desire, unforgiveness, lack of knowledge. When any of these 12 things actively operating in your life, you will find yourself in a cycle of bondage, not ever receiving complete freedom. Any of these things give demonic powers legal and biblical grounds to remain in your life. These legal grounds must be destroyed in order to receive and maintain deliverance. Make it a definite decision to get your deliverance. Don't put it off. Satan will attempt to discourage you and distract you to make it inconvenient to get your deliverance. Deliverance begins, as do all blessings, received from God with a decision. Determine you want to be free, and then, having made that decision, don't let anything prevent you from obtaining it. The decision to be free incorporates the decision to submit oneself to God and to resist the devil. Deliverance brings freedom and joy. What is your name? God wants to give you a new name, and a new nature, and a new walk, and a new talk, and a new beginning, and a new life, and a new hope, Holy Ghost filled future. But to do that, you have to deal with your denial. You have to claim your brokenness. Get real with yourself before you can ever become the new person in Jesus Christ. Many of us have been living in denial and discord between our lives and what God is calling us to be. Some of you are like Jacob, are at the crossroads, and you have to make some radical changes in your life or else. If you want deliverance in your life today, this message will help you get to the next level in God. God wrestled with me many years in my life. God been calling me to get saved and be delivered. I've denied God many of years in my life. I wasn't ready to give up. But I thank God for keeping me in my denial towards serving Him. I could have been dead. I could have never sleep or have peace in my mind or more life until I did what God told me to do. And that is to surrender all. I would have dreams of going to hell, tormented in my sleep there. God told me one day not too long ago, before I got saved, if I didn't give up, that he would kill me. I always believed I couldn't stop smoking weed or cigarettes and living in sin. My grandpa told me one day that your problem is that you're trying to stop stuff on your own instead of giving your life to God and letting him deliver you. Today I am a living witness that God will deliver and set free. It wasn't until then I got tired of getting no sleep and having those dreams of hell. Tired of spending all my money on weed and cigarettes and partying every weekend. Everything I did in sin was a consequence either with the laws or people. It wasn't meant for me. But I am here to tell you I've been delivered and set free. If God can deliver me, he can deliver you too. Give up, surrender all, and be set free. Be like Jacob, deliverance when you do. Receive deliverance, and when you do, you will be called Israel, for you have wrestled and overcome. Be delivered, give him praise. You don't have to go home not delivered. Whatever you're going through, God's a deliverer.